Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing fabulously, thank you very much, and all the better for spending some quality time with you, and a fabulous story I have to share with you tonight. But before we get started, don't forget to get that quintessential drink, whatever it is that you enjoy drinking, whether it's an ice-cold glass of Coca-Cola or lemonade, or something a little bit more flamboyant, like kombucha or perhaps sparkling wine. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, from the very beginning, things were peculiar. I don't know how to put a finger on it, but from the moment we purchased that exquisite piece of land, surrounded by rolling verdant green hills and gorgeous valleys, not to mention prepossessing arresting North American scenery, dotted with copious areas of wood green, I sensed something was seriously off, and expressed my extreme misgivings to my husband.
"You know what your trouble is, sweetheart," said my husband. "You're as stubborn as an ox, and very resistant and intransigent to change. You're a typical Taurus. If you had your way, we would be still living in the same tiny apartment in Woodstock, Illinois, which we bought when we first got married, and that would be very, very sad. The place was the size of a shoebox. You barely had enough room to swing around a baseball bat. I do recall you were very reluctant and opposed to moving to that lovely Cape Cod-style home in Galena that we eventually purchased that overlooked the waterfront. Most normal people would have jumped at the chance to have more space and to be surrounded by such lavish, pretty, spectacular scenic views on the water. But not you. You're a funny one," he chuckled.
You mean you purchased the house, I said stiffly. If I remember correctly, I didn't have much of a say in the matter, and I wasn't that averse or reluctant to move somewhere bigger. It was just I liked Woodstock. It was convivial and friendly, and the people were ever so nice. That's why I didn't want to move. I loved the town square there, and the quaintness of the place, not to mention all the fun festivals. It was more just than bricks and mortar, you know. It's the people and the neighbourhood that matters. That's what makes a place home.
"Even so, if I hadn't given you the quintessential big push, we would have never moved to our beautiful home in Galena, and that would have been very unfortunate, for I do not believe you regretted the move for a moment," my husband said smugly, with that gloating I told you so tone to his voice, which wound me up so much. "Maybe not," I agreed, "but I'm happy where we live now in Galena. The town is so quaint, and I love the people, and all the antique shopping here. I don't want to move again. I really don't. I've made the most amazing friends, and the area is so enchanting, I couldn't want for more. I don't honestly know what possessed you to buy acres of land off the cuff like that. It was a crazy thing for you to do. It's like you always seem to have ants in your pants, eager for change. It's a good job you weren't born a tortoise, because you'd be opposed to living in your own shell, and you'd be stuck with it." "It's called being spontaneous," said my husband. "You wouldn't know the meaning of the word. I was hardly going to stare a gift horse in the mouth, was I? The land in Maryville is bedazzling, and it borders the Cherokee National Forest, which is on the Appalachian State Trail. It was going for such a good price, and look how spectacular that land is, and the forest to the rear of our property is teeming with tall, mature chestnut, red oaks, maples and hickory trees. What's there not to like? And of course there's an abundance of indigenous wildlife living there, from black bears to cougars, deers and raccoons. and you love wild animals."
Just because I love nature and wild animals does not mean I'm predisposed to moving, I exclaimed.
"You will love it, sweetheart. I promise you," my husband assured me enthusiastically. "We'll hire an architect to design us our dream home according to our personal specifications, and all this land will be ours. Imagine the fun we will have. You can look after some free-range chickens, and we can buy a couple of horses, and in a couple of years' time, we can start having children all of our own. Because let's face it, you're not getting any younger, sweetheart, and that biological clock of yours is ticking very fast. So much so that I can hear every tick," he teased. I groaned in annoyance with my husband. That was a cruel blow, suggesting I wasn't getting any younger. What was he trying to say? Was I aging disgracefully or something, and needed to get some of my old eggs fertilised before they passed their best?
Why is it when trees get older, they're considered magnificent, mature and resplendent, but the moment when a woman gets fractionally older, we become like the bedraggled weeds in a flower bed that are put on the scrap heap and good for nothing? Surely maturity should be revered in our culture like it is in ancient cultures, where older women are esteemed for their wisdom and knowledge, and are not just considered baby-making machines. My husband's unscrupulous comments and uninhibited impulsiveness were becoming infuriating for me. He was the type of person that would impetuously dive into the deep end on a pier without any hesitation whatsoever, not considering the potential ramifications that there might actually be sharks in the water, or the temperature might be icy cold. No, he was always unrepressed and spontaneously eager to just take the plunge. I, on the other hand, was exceedingly prudent, circumspect and vigilant, and would probably dip my toe in the water cautiously first to check the temperature and to ensure that there weren't any predators lurking around before embarking on a risky adventure and diving in the water at the pier. Maybe that was why we'd fallen in love, because they say opposites attract, although why I can't imagine. When we first met, he'd wined and dined me at all these spectacular restaurants, and I would always mindfully order the safe conservative options that I regularly ate, but my husband would insist I tried something different and very exotic. So perhaps underneath it all, there was a very small, tiny part of me that longed to break away from the dependable security I anchored around myself hypothetically. Yet despite everything, from the moment my husband had taken me to see the impressive plot of unspoilt land he had purchased injudiciously, which was over 60 acres of rolling green countryside, something in my gut was troubling me about this unpremeditated purchase. I could not put a finger on it, but the whole thing bothered me exponentially. In a trice the building project began, and our dream house was being built from scratch and was starting to materialise. Regardless of my reticent reservations and pronounced misgivings, I was becoming enthused over the plans, as I was having my dream kitchen constructed, and as I was a passionate cook, having a state-of-the-art kitchen catering to my fanciful whims was a very pleasing prospect for me indeed. Yet despite all this, something continued to bother me about this building development, and at night I'd often have strange nightmares, and over again I would see this oversized, whiter-than-white coloured wolf with very sad, disappointed blue eyes looking at me in my dreams and howling. And sometimes I would wake up, hyperventilating or in a cold sweat, for I sensed the dream's meanings were very profound and significant. Imagine my surprise when many of the builders on our building site reported very strange sightings of a mysterious white wolf-like creature with blue eyes, very much like the wolf in my dreams. One of the workers actually told me that the creature was so magnificent and huge and much bigger than your average normal-sized wolf. "It looks at you with these very sad eyes, howls and then vanishes," he told me. One of our builders had surreptitiously tried to take a photograph of the mysterious creature, but when the photos were finally developed, there was no sign of the wolf in the picture, and he was very befuddled. "I know it was standing over there,
by the cluster of red oak trees, he told me. But look, there's nothing in the picture at all. How is that possible? I don't understand. For it would seem that many of the workers could verify that they too had beheld the magnificent creature. Even odder and stranger still was that when the worker went towards the old oak trees, he noticed sizable paw markings of a huge wolf in the ground, so the mystery deepened for all of us. It was 3 months later when we finally moved into our new home, and boxes were being unpacked and furniture arranged around our home, and even I had to concede that the property was indeed beguiling, stunning, and very stylish. What I loved about our new home was it gave you the impression of being on holiday perpetually. Our house possessed the quintessential Mediterranean feel about it, and I've always loved the sun-soaked feeling of seaside locations, and why not here in Maryville? The exterior of our coral-coloured double-storey symmetrical home had red terracotta tiles, stucco walls, ornate arches, along with exquisitely designed wrought-iron balconies from the second floor, and enclosed outdoor spaces. It also aligned with the countryside in such a complementary fashion, almost as if it had always belonged there, for it fitted there so well. We had enlisted the help of a fabulous interior designer called Barbara, who had brought the house up to speed with interesting contemporary artworks and eclectic furnishings, along with vintage antiques, that gave our house that interesting edge. We also used Mediterranean colours on our interiors, such as bright blues, turquoises and crisp aquas, indicative of the sea, complemented by white plaster, whitewashed wooden floors and white columns. But we did add some warm gold and red accents to the equation so that the house didn't feel too cold in the winter months. One day in my exquisite blue, white and yellow kitchen, I was washing dishes at the sink and got the overwhelming, disturbing sensation that something or someone was watching me, and that was when I saw him. It was the large wolf of my dreams, only this creature was very definitely real, and was so much bigger than any wolf I'd ever encountered in nature, with the brightest yet saddest blue eyes I've ever seen. The creature was utterly magnificent and large, covered in the whitest mane of silky soft hair, and he looked right through me in the kitchen window, howling, and the sound was so desperately sad it made me want to cry. I was just about to dash out of the kitchen to follow the strange creature, and then he vanished from my sight. What did the wolf want with me, I wondered? I had seen this creature manifested in my dreams, now in real life, and I felt it was symbolic of something very significant. But when I discussed it with my husband, who is about as spiritual as a pint of cold beer on a Sunday night, he couldn't understand my reaction to the creature.
"So you saw a wolf, sweetheart, like many of the workers did. What's the big deal about that? It's an animal, for goodness sake."
The wolf had blue eyes for a start, and that's very rare for a wolf. And it was big, much bigger than your standard wolf.
"It's probably a recessive gene," said my husband. "It happens all the time in nature. You see it with white lions in the wilderness, and even red hair on a human being is due to a recessive gene. It's very unique. That's all."
The following 2 evenings I was visited by the rather elusive and mysterious wolf again, and I felt certain he wanted something from me, but what I couldn't imagine. But when I dashed out of the kitchen door, he seemed to always vanish into thin air, and that was more than a little bit disturbing. One evening after I'd spotted the wolf yet again, there was a gentle knock at our door. I think it must have been about 10 o'clock in the evening, and I quickly opened the door to a North American Cherokee Indian that reminded me of photographs I'd seen of indigenous people from bygone days. He possessed long, dark, coarse-textured hair that hung below his shoulders and was as black as a raven's feathers. He had high, very distinguished-looking cheekbones, a slightly bent nose, and a reddish-brown toned skin. The one thing that set him apart from the photographs I'd seen in museums is that although he had the typical almond-shaped eyes, his eyes were blue and not brown. And his eyes were so remarkably like the wolves that I'd become acquainted with over the last few days, which was more than a little odd, for I'd never known an Indian to have blue eyes before,
and set against his red-brown skin, they stood out to me like aquamarine jewels. I did not know how to react to the Indian, for I was so astonished by the very sight of him, and I gawked at him very, very rudely, forgetting my manners. For it is not every day when an Indian from your history books seems to take on a physical life form and enter your reality. I say that because this mysterious Indian man was wearing traditional Cherokee attire, which included a stunning loose linen shirt, deerskin leggings and moccasins, and around his waist he wore a beaded belt, while both his wrists were graced with very opulent-looking large decorative armbands, and on the crown of his head was a stylized band with 2 eagle's feathers attached to it. My husband ventured down our sweeping wrought-iron staircase and stopped dead in his tracks. He stared at the visitor at our door. For a second he looked rather perplexed, and then he smiled warmly at our guest.
"I like your Cherokee ensemble," he said. "It looks like the real deal. You could pass for being 100% Cherokee Indian, with the exception, of course, of your blue eyes, which are the giveaway," he joked.
"I am 100% Indian," said the man, who clearly took offence to my husband's impertinence. "Don't mind my husband," I said, reaching out to shake the Indian's hand warmly. It felt as cold as ice to the touch. "My husband Donovan has the ability to put his foot into it every time. He has the tact of a rhinoceros, I'm afraid. Do please come in," I said, guiding the Indian into our living area. "Oh, by the way, my name is Paisley," I said. "I'm sorry, I didn't get your name."
"Uawaya,"
said the Indian man. "It's Cherokee for white wolf." For a moment I stood there staring at the man in disbelief. I was gobsmacked. "Your name means white wolf," I repeated, looking at him with an astonished look on my face. "That's right," said the Indian, looking at me intensely with his blue eyes. "Right," I said, looking rather awkward by this stunning revelation. "Sorry, can I get you anything to drink? Do pardon my appalling manners."
"No, I'm very fine," said Uaiwa. "I am here about this property that you have built. My people are not happy, and their spirits are very angry indeed, for they do not appreciate being rudely awoken from their resting places."
"Sorry, I don't know what you're talking about. You've got me."
"You have built your home on an ancient Indian burial site. It needs to be removed, for the spirits of my people are growing angry, restless, aggrieved, and indignant. They will stop at nothing to wreak revenge on you and your home if you do not oblige them with their request. For you need to tear this house down to the ground and leave the land as it was before, for it is sacred for my people and must be undisturbed and undefiled, for it is sacred indeed."
"But that's not possible," said my husband, growing red in the face.
"You don't understand, Uawa, whatever your name is. I spent half a fortune on this place and have taken a large amount of loans out from the bank. Losing this place will surely bankrupt us."
"You will be compensated financially," said the Indian.
"But do as I say, for if you fail to listen to the howls of the wolf in your dream, and if you fail to heed his warnings, you may be inflicted with great trouble and persecution, for the spirit world will unleash its wrath upon you, and you really do not want to be on the receiving end of that. Believe me, for you have been warned."
"Who are you?" I asked.
"I am Uawa,"
said the man, looking at me intently with the same intense steely blue eyes of the white wolf. I feel like I know you," I said. "You are familiar. Your eyes, the white wolf I see outside my kitchen window at night, the very, very same." The Indian glanced at me and gave me a knowing, intimate smile, and he glided out of our home so swiftly and I ran after him as quickly as I could, but he was gone. He had vanished, disappeared, almost into thin air. Where was he? The weird part of it all was that he seemed to just be nowhere. 1 minute he was there, and then he was gone. I mean, how does that happen? "Did I not tell you?" I said, pointing an accusing finger at my husband when I returned to the house. "I told you something was wrong about this land." "But would you listen?" "No, of course not." "Oh, yes, I forgot. You know so much better than everybody else. You are like a bulldozer. You plough over everything without even looking at what you're doing. I bet you didn't even make any inquiries about this land you purchased. You've only gone and built our home over an Indian burial site. What a prize idiot you are." "If you think I'm going to do what that wire man, whatever his name is, says, and pull our house down, after all the blood and sweat and tears I've injected into the place, you're smoking something, sweetheart. I've pumped a great deal of money into this home, and I'm not about to bulldoze it down at any cost." "You have to do what the Indian says," I said, stamping my foot indignantly. "Did you not hear that this land is sacred, and the spirits aren't happy with us? If we stay here, they could do some horrible things to us." "Oh, for goodness sake, sweetheart," said my husband. "Stop overreacting and filling your imagination with all kinds of fanciful thoughts. We have built our house on an old burial site. So what? What does it really matter? Those people are long since dead. Do you think for a moment that if my bones were lying buried under the ground of this house, that I would give a jot? Of course I wouldn't. I'm already dead. Why would it matter?" "You don't get it," I said, "do you? It's a question of respect and honour. This is sacred land. It means a lot to the Cherokee Indians." As you can imagine, getting through to my husband's tough rhino hide was pretty much impossible. So I knew I had no option but to let sleeping dogs lie, which was exceedingly difficult for me. I was secretly terrified that something outer-worldly would start happening to us. I was a staunch and avid believer in the supernatural realm, and I thought that the long-term consequences of living over an Indian burial ground would bring about havoc, chaos, and ruination on our lives, and it would seem I was not wrong in my foreboding presumptions. Every night, without fail, the exquisitely beautiful white wolf would enter my dreams, as though warning me to get out of the house, and very gradually strange things began to happen slowly and surely around our home that even my husband could no longer deny. Although in the beginning, due to his bolshy indifference, he tried to pretend nothing untoward was going on. We would be sitting in front of the television together, watching a television programme, and then you could see a 3-dimensional dark shadow walking directly past the set, and you would second-guess yourself and say, "Did I really see that?" Before long, these creepy humanoid dark shadows that appeared to inhabit a solid density devoid of any light would be darting around the rooms in our home, and it felt ominously sinister, like we were being watched by menacing unseen eyes. And all the time as we were being scrutinised, we could hear these invisible entities whispering to each other about us. It was incredibly discomposing and distressing, and I knew my husband could sense it, because the expression upon his face was growing more unsettled and troubled every single day. "Something is happening in our home. Something paranormal," he said, looking at me with startled, scared eyes. "Last night I saw the white wolf with the blue eyes in my dreams, the one you keep seeing. And his eyes were exactly the same as the Indian that we met. Remember the man? What was his name?" "I think it was Uaweo or something like that," I said. "Let's leave now. Listen to him. He was trying to help us. He was a good man." My words fell on deaf ears, because despite everything, my husband did not want to give up our home so easily, and was trying to research what he could do to appease the angry spirits of the dead. But every night the atmosphere in our home became more and more tense, and we would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night to hear strange chanting and singing coming from far away. But as every day went by, the haunting sounds became ominously closer and closer towards our home, leaving us both feeling like we were being hunted and stalked by the spirits of the living dead. It was very, very frightening and exceedingly unsettling. One night I was awoken with a start. It was 12 o'clock. I could hear the sounds of flutes and rattles and drums, and the strange chanting sounds of people. And it was so close, way too close for comfort. I darted out towards the balcony and looked down on the verdant green lawn that surrounded our home. It was a full moon, and the dark sky was unusually light, scattered with a kaleidoscope of twinkling silvery stars. I could see the dark, shadowy Cherokee Indians, all wearing deerskin leggings. Although their faces were obscure, I could see the intricate details of the beadwork on their clothes. They were all chanting in a repetitive, very sinister and menacing tone, and moving around and around our home in circles. I knew instinctively that they were ghosts, even though they were so physical in appearance, because there was a translucency to them, and their body movements almost seemed to float, as they were so fluid and seamless. "Oh my God," said my husband, joining me out on the patio. "What the heck is going on down there?" he said, watching the ominous ghostly figures infiltrate the exterior of our property. My husband's eyes grew as round as saucers, and he physically began to shake with terror. "We should have listened to the Indian," he said quietly. "I have a horrible feeling that we have left it too late, sweetheart," he said, suddenly grabbing me into his arms and holding me ever so tightly, and even sobbing in my shoulder. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I should have listened to you. I was too proud for my own good."
I said nothing, for indeed there was nothing to say. The tribe of spectral, ethereal Indian entities that had surrounded our home shook their musical instruments hard and vigorously, and all of a sudden, as if by magic, those rattles morphed into torches of light, and the illusory, shadowy, phantom-like beings began lighting up our house in a sea of crackling flames, and our home began to breathe heavily and slowly. It puffed like a dragon, pouring out its pervasive, unsuppressed wrath of rambunctious, feisty, and rebellious red and amber flames. Some that looked so livid and angry, they became purple in colour. It was like the windows and doors were alive with flames, and our house was crumbling and melting to the ground, so fast, like the heat of a blazing hot sun melting ice cream on a very hot day. I was now feeling sick to my stomach, nauseous and quite violently ill, so much so that I wanted to throw up. In my desperation, I ran over to the landing to see that the staircase itself was now on fire. So my husband and I were well and truly trapped inside our home, unless we jumped off the balcony, of course, from our bedroom, and that would almost certainly kill us in the process. My life flashed before me in a series of swift photographic images as I faced the gravity of our impending deaths. I knew death was moments away, and the smell of the acrid smoke was filling my lungs with hot air, and it was getting unbearably hot. My eyes were beginning to water. It was an airy feeling that overwhelmed me with a rising sense of dread. I suddenly heard this almighty thumping sound, and everything in our room began to shake like a mini earthquake, as if something colossal had heaved itself onto our balcony. And that was when I saw the biggest creature that I've ever seen standing before us. I let out a terrifying scream. Ah! For this creature was about 8 foot tall, possibly more, I can't be sure of that, and it was covered with long, flowing dark hair, and was so intimidating, I was absolutely terrified. No words can describe that kind of fear. The creature lunged towards me unhesitantly, and grabbed me, throwing me over his shoulders like a large sack of potatoes, and then he dropped me from a few feet, and I began to free fall down the side of the house,
to find myself being caught by a pair of very powerful hands that belonged to an identical-looking creature. She let out a shrill whistle when she caught me, and immediately glided away with me to the edge of the wood green, and placed me down on the grassy verge. I could see the critter clearly in the light of the full moon, and could see the kind concern in her twinkling, deep-set dark eyes. I noticed that she was female, for she had firm breasts. The only way I can describe her to you is like a giant wild woman, covered in long flowing hair of a dark colour, and possessed overlong arms and powerful long legs. I noticed that every single part of her anatomy was so solidly built and dense with muscle, and the upper shoulders and torso were so huge, and the cone-shaped head possessed a human face. When I realised that this extraordinary creature had saved my life, as I could see our house burning down, collapsing and folding before my very eyes, I ran into her arms and just cried and cried. In her arms I was like a tiny doll, but she held me tightly to her chest and spoke to me in a very soothing voice in an audible, ancient-sounding dialect that was rather nasal and spoken from the back of her throat, with the occasional clicking sound. She was so reassuring and kind towards me, and her love was unfathomable, for she did not even know me, but she still seemed to love me. Even though I did not understand her words, I knew she was telling me that all would be well. All of a sudden, another creature came gliding towards us, and he was carrying my husband across his shoulders. I recognised him as the creature that had initially rescued me and thrown me to the other creature to catch. I got the impression that they were in a partnership together. My husband was put on the ground very gently and came running towards me, and we wept for joy as we embraced each other, because we knew how close we came to losing our lives.
"I thought I'd lost you," I cried to my husband. "So did I, my sweetheart. I'm so sorry. I really let you down."
One thing they never tell you about fire is how in seconds it can get out of control. These kindly creatures were incredibly protective towards us, and they refused to leave our sides until the dawn broke the following morning. Maybe they were protecting us from the angry ghosts. I don't know. I ran up to both creatures the following morning and hugged them before they left. I was not afraid to do this because they had saved our lives, and they seemed to grunt with pleasure because they knew that their valiant efforts to rescue us had not gone unappreciated. And they nodded to us, and we watched them glide away, and they moved with such a seamless grace. To cut a very long story short, we never returned to that piece of land again. I think it might have been given back to the Cherokee National Forest, but I'm not sure about that. We promptly moved back to our old hometown, and one day in an antique shop I was buying a work of art that I had no idea would actually be a masterpiece that had been painted by a great artist, and it sold for a fortune at Sotheby's. So along with all that insurance money and the painting, we were more than able to recoup all our costs. All these years later, I now know without a shadow of a doubt that we were rescued by the mythical creature of legend that actually is very real, called Bigfoot, and that the Indian that we encountered was very true to his words, for we were compensated for all our losses financially. It's difficult for me to hear anyone express negative feelings about these creatures known as Bigfoot, but I do appreciate that, like people, you must get good ones and bad ones. The Bigfoots that saved us that night were quite literally the most extraordinary creatures that I have ever been privy to meet. Looking back, I believe that the Indian that visited us was a spirit, despite the fact that he appeared so solid and lifelike, and that he was able to morph into a wolf in my dreams. Of that I am certain, for the eyes were exactly the same. I believe he was good, for he did try to warn us about the dangers of remaining on a property that was built on an Indian burial site. As for the ghostly phenomenon that we encountered that was responsible for burning down our house, these entities were able to also take on a human form and physically burn down our home, for we both saw them with our own eyes. This has made me take a look on the spirit world in a brand new light, and made me realise that not all is what it may seem.
My husband and I moved back to Galena, where we still live today, and I did end up having 2 children, a girl and a boy. I called my daughter Sybil because it's the name of a mother goddess whose companions were wild animals, and I chose that name because of the Bigfoot we encountered, who was, in a way, like a companion to us and a wild animal at the same time. And I called my son Weir, after the Indian that literally came to warn us. So there you are. That's my story. What a fabulous story. Oh, I so enjoyed it, especially the white wolf with the blue eyes. That blew my mind. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to subscribe. Until next time, goodbye and good night.